On a late autumn afternoon, in the kind of small American town where everyone knows one another, the school day ended with the usual shuffle of footsteps, lockers slamming, and the soft murmur of students heading home. Among them was 25-year-old Emily Carter, a young English teacher finishing up her second year at Ridgeway High. To her students, she was the kind of teacher who made literature feel alive. To her colleagues, she was a rising star in the department, known for staying late to grade essays and for never leaving without a kind word in the hallway. On that day, everything about Emily seemed perfectly ordinary. She gathered her papers, locked her classroom, and told another teacher she was ready for the weekend. No one would realize those were the last words she would ever be known to say. When Emily didn't return home that evening, her absence was first brushed off as a possible errand. She lived alone in a small apartment less than 10 minutes from the high school, a quiet place decorated with second-hand furniture and books piled on every surface. Friends sometimes teased her for being a workaholic, for spending her evenings with stacks of essays instead of going out. So when she didn't answer her phone that night, no one panicked immediately. People assumed she was busy, maybe working late, maybe visiting a bookstore, or even taking a rare night to herself. But by midnight, the tone shifted. Emily's mother, who spoke to her daughter daily, grew worried when calls went unanswered. By morning, that worry hardened into fear. Emily's mother drove to her apartment, knocking on the door, only to find her car absent and the lights off inside. She contacted the school and quickly learned Emily had never shown up for her scheduled department meeting the evening before. The alarm was raised. The local police department received the missing persons report early that morning. At first, the officers treated it cautiously. Adults disappear for a range of reasons, and it isn't unusual for someone in their 20s to take a sudden trip or seek a break from routine. But when officers checked Emily's bank records, they found no activity. When they called her cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. And when they reached the high school to question staff, they uncovered the first unsettling detail. Several teachers remembered seeing Emily walk toward the staff parking lot just after 4 o'clock. She carried her bag, a stack of folders pressed to her chest, and she was heading in the direction of her car. But no one could say they actually saw her leave. Somewhere between the last hallway and the short stretch of asphalt outside, Emily Carter vanished. By the afternoon, patrol cars circled the school. Officers walked the grounds, speaking to janitors, custodians, and lingering staff. Students were questioned, parents called. The routine was methodical, but tense, because the officers knew the first 24 hours were crucial. At 3 o'clock, they found her car. It was parked at the edge of the staff lot, locked, apparently untouched. Her purse was inside, along with her keys, her wallet, even her phone, wedged between the driver's seat and the console. The discovery turned the situation from worrisome to urgent. People don't simply walk away from their life without their car, their phone, or their wallet. Investigators searched for signs of a struggle near the vehicle, combing the ground for broken jewelry, scattered papers, or tire marks that might suggest she had been forced away. But the pavement offered nothing. No blood, no scuff marks, no broken glass. Just a clean, ordinary parking lot, the same as it had been the day before. News of her disappearance spread quickly through town. Parents began calling the school, terrified at the thought of someone snatching a teacher in broad daylight. Rumors spread across social media, each one more frantic than the last. Some said she had been followed for weeks. Others claimed she was seen at a nearby gas station. The truth was far less dramatic. No one knew anything at all. Detectives pressed harder. They visited Emily's apartment, confirming it looked untouched since the morning she left. Groceries still sat on the counter, dishes clean in the sink, lesson plans spread across her table. It was the image of a woman fully planning to return home. They contacted her recent boyfriend, a fellow teacher she'd broken up with only weeks earlier. He appeared shaken, cooperative, and insisted he hadn't spoken to her since. They interviewed a handful of students who had grown unusually close to her, wondering if any had followed her after school. Each lead fizzled out as quickly as it appeared. By nightfall, a search party was organized. Volunteers scoured the nearby riverbank and wooded trails, hoping she had wandered into an accident. Flashlights cut through the darkness, dogs sniffed the air, officers shouted her name. But the night yielded nothing, not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, not even a trail. It was as if she had walked out of the parking lot and dissolved into thin air. Her family, exhausted and terrified, gave interviews on local television, pleading for her safe return. Her students, too young to fully process the gravity of what had happened, left hand-drawn notes and flowers outside her classroom door. The school, normally a place of chatter and activity, took on the weight of silence. The first day after Emily's disappearance ended with more questions than answers. Police didn't yet know whether they were looking for a voluntary disappearance, a sudden abduction, or something far worse. But one fact became undeniable. The last known sighting of Emily Carter was in the hallway of Ridgeway High, and every second after that remained a void. As the night gave way to morning, investigators and family alike could only brace for what the coming days might reveal, unaware of the years of silence and heartbreak that were about to follow. The morning after Emily Carter failed to come home, Ridgeway High stood unnervingly still. What was normally a hub of chatter and movement had the weight of a crime scene. Detectives from the local sheriff's department arrived before the first bell rang, knowing the school was the last confirmed place she had been seen. Their job in those early hours was methodical, retrace every step of Emily's final day, beginning with the classroom where she had packed her things. Inside, her desk looked untouched. A half-empty mug of tea sat cold, papers were stacked neatly in a pile, and the faint smell of dry erase markers clung to the whiteboard where she had written instructions for the next day's lesson. Nothing looked forced or hurried. Teachers recalled she had locked the classroom carefully, the way she always did. Her final conversations were casual. She was tired, looking forward to grading essays at home. Nothing in her demeanor suggested fear or that she was aware of anyone following her. From there, detectives walked the hallway toward the staff lot. Security cameras at Ridgeway High were limited. Grainy footage from a single angle showed the hallway where she had passed at around 4:10 p.m. She carried her bag and a stack of folders, walked at an even pace, and disappeared out of frame toward the door leading outside. That was it. There was no follow-up footage of her reaching her car. From the hallway to the lot, she simply vanished. The parking lot became the next focal point. Officers located her Toyota Corolla on the far edge near the tree line. The vehicle was locked, parked neatly between two faded lines. Inside, they could see her purse resting on the passenger seat, her wallet inside, her phone wedged down beside the console. Even her car keys were there, sitting loosely in the cup holder. The realization struck quickly. This was not a woman preparing to run away. People don't lock their car, leave their only means of transportation, and walk away from their entire life without so much as a phone. Forensics was called. Gloves went on, photographs were taken, and the car was processed inch by inch. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no scratches suggesting a struggle. Dusting for prints revealed only Emily's and a few smudges too partial to identify. Nothing pointed to an intruder. The only peculiar detail was the placement of her keys inside the locked car. Investigators debated. Had she accidentally locked herself out, or had someone else placed them there deliberately? Detectives expanded their search outward. They interviewed staff still on campus that afternoon. A custodian remembered seeing Emily in the hallway. Nothing unusual. Another teacher said she waved goodbye in passing. None of them saw her walk to her car. No one heard a cry for help. No one saw her leave with anyone. It was as if she had walked into a blind spot between the hallway and the parking lot, never to reappear. By late afternoon, search teams fanned out beyond the school grounds. Officers on foot pushed into the surrounding wooded trails that ran behind the parking lot, flashlights sweeping through thick brush. They walked along the shallow banks of the river that cut behind the sports field, dragging long poles through the water in case she had fallen. Volunteers joined in, combing nearby fields and drainage ditches, calling her name into the open air. Helicopters were requested from the state police, circling overhead with thermal imaging equipment, scanning for a heat signature that might point to a body in distress. But the screens came back blank. Bloodhounds were brought to the scene, given Emily's scent from a scarf her mother provided. The dogs traced her scent reliably from her classroom to the parking lot, right up to her car, but beyond that, they sat down, confused, as if the trail ended abruptly. That moment chilled everyone involved. Detectives considered the possibilities. If Emily had collapsed near the school, they would have found her by now. If she had walked away voluntarily, someone would have seen her. If she had been abducted, the perpetrator had left behind no trace, no witness, no scream, not even a misplaced shoe. Each theory seemed to contradict the evidence. Her family, standing near the edge of the search zone, grew more distraught as the day wore on. Her mother clutched Emily's picture in her hands, repeating to anyone who would listen that her daughter would never simply leave. Her father paced the lot in silence, staring at the car as if it held the answer. To them, it was obvious. Something terrible had happened between the school doors and that car. As the sun dipped below the horizon, searchers returned empty-handed. Flashlights flickered across the lot as officers regrouped, their notes filled with dead ends. The sheriff addressed the volunteers, thanking them for their efforts and promising that this was only the beginning. The official line was cautious. They didn't yet know if they were dealing with a runaway, an accident, or a crime. But privately, detectives admitted the situation was already tilting toward the worst-case scenario. That night, the school became both a place of education and a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the lot, officers posted patrol cars along the road, and teachers left the building shaken. Word spread quickly through the small town, and by the next morning, Ridgeway High was swarmed by reporters. The image of Emily's locked car became the first haunting symbol of the mystery. The first 24 hours of the investigation ended with no sign of her. No tracks in the mud, no eyewitness account, no evidence to suggest where she had gone. Hope still lingered. Maybe she was lost, maybe she would walk back into her mother's arms. But underneath that hope ran a growing dread. The trail had already gone cold. And with each passing hour, the possibility of finding Emily safe slipped further away, leaving her family and investigators staring into the silence of unanswered questions. As the days passed without a trace of Emily Carter, the investigation shifted from frantic searching to building a picture of her private life. Detectives understood that when someone disappears without warning, the answers are often hidden in the details of who they were, what pressures they faced, and who might have wanted to harm them. On the surface, Emily seemed like the least likely target of foul play. She was kind, dedicated to her students, and deeply close with her family. But as investigators pulled at threads, a more complicated picture began to emerge. The first discovery was her growing stress at work. Colleagues described her as passionate, sometimes to the point of exhaustion. She graded assignments late into the night, and she often took criticism of her teaching personally. One fellow teacher recalled an argument with a parent over a failing grade, the conversation escalating into threats of filing complaints with the school board. Emily brushed it off at the time, but police wondered whether such confrontations had left her vulnerable. Could an angry parent or disgruntled student have taken their frustration beyond words? Her phone records raised more questions. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Emily had received a series of late-night calls from an unknown number. They always came after midnight, never with a message left behind. Investigators traced the calls to a prepaid phone, unregistered and untraceable. To detectives, it was a chilling detail. Someone had gone out of their way to conceal their identity while reaching her again and again. Friends admitted Emily once mentioned feeling uneasy about the calls, but she had laughed it off, saying it was probably a prank. Her recent breakup quickly came under scrutiny. Emily had dated another teacher at Ridgeway High, a science instructor in his 30s. Their relationship had been quiet, but steady for over a year. According to friends, Emily ended things just weeks before she vanished. Detectives brought him in for questioning, and though he appeared shaken, he denied any involvement. He admitted he had been upset by the breakup, but insisted he had accepted it. His alibi placed him at a family dinner the evening Emily disappeared, corroborated by several relatives. While police could not entirely rule him out, there was no evidence tying him to her absence. Rumors within the school fueled further suspicion. Several students whispered that one of their classmates had grown obsessed with Emily. He was quiet, often withdrawn, and known for writing troubling essays that blurred the line between fantasy and reality. Some students claimed he followed her after class, lingering near her room long after the halls emptied. Detectives interviewed him, and while he appeared nervous, nothing in his account directly linked him to the disappearance. He insisted he admired her as a teacher and denied ever contacting her outside of school. Still, his name lingered in the background of the investigation, an unsettling reminder of how little was truly known about the hidden dynamics between teacher and student. Other theories began to circulate. Some suggested Emily may have left on her own, overwhelmed by work and personal strain. Others speculated she had run into someone she trusted in the parking lot and willingly left with them, only for things to go wrong. Detectives considered the possibility of a crime of opportunity, a stranger passing through town who spotted her alone and vulnerable. Each theory was pursued, each one opening new doors, but none led to the breakthrough the case so desperately needed. For Emily's family, the speculation was agonizing. Every theory seemed to tarnish the daughter they knew. She wasn't the type to run away. She wasn't reckless with relationships. She wasn't careless with her safety. But as the rumors grew louder, the portrait of Emily painted in the public eye began to fracture. To investigators, however, the contradictions only deepened the mystery. The pressure to find answers mounted. Detectives brought in experts from the State Bureau, hoping fresh eyes might spot overlooked details. Profilers suggested the late-night calls pointed to stalking behavior, possibly escalating toward abduction. But without tangible evidence, no body, no weapon, no clear suspect, the case remained stuck between theory and fact. Local media seized on the uncertainty, publishing speculative headlines that only added to the frenzy. Stories about Emily's breakup were printed beside grainy photos of students, while anonymous tips flooded the police hotline. Every claim, no matter how wild, had to be investigated, draining resources and frustrating officers already working long hours. One caller swore they saw her in a neighboring county. Another claimed she'd been spotted boarding a bus. Each lead proved false. By the end of the first month, the list of suspects had narrowed to shadows. The ex-boyfriend remained under quiet suspicion, though no evidence tied him to her. The troubled student lingered in rumor, but faded from active inquiry. The unknown caller was never identified, their silence after Emily's disappearance leaving an eerie gap in the timeline. The case, once brimming with energy and focus, began to stall. In the absence of clarity, the darkness of possibility hung over the town. Families whispered about strangers lurking near the school. Students walked home in pairs, afraid to linger in the halls alone. Emily's colleagues, once united in their grief, grew uneasy with each other, wondering if one of them knew more than they were saying. And through it all, her family sat by the phone, waiting for a call that never came. Theories swirled like smoke, each one plausible, each one terrifying. But none brought them closer to the truth. And as investigators stared at the evidence board lined with photographs, phone records, and timelines, they began to feel the weight of something even worse than uncertainty, the crushing realization that every door they opened seemed to lead to another dead end. With the physical search producing no trace of Emily Carter, detectives turned their focus inward, toward the web of people and pressures that defined her life. They began by building a profile, asking who Emily really was beneath the surface of lesson plans and bright classroom smiles. To most, she was the model of stability, kind-hearted, conscientious, and dedicated to her students. But in the cracks of her routine, investigators uncovered stresses that suddenly seemed far more significant. Teachers recalled that Emily had been under mounting pressure in the weeks before she vanished. She had clashed with a handful of parents over grades, parents who accused her of being too strict or playing favorites. One confrontation grew heated enough that a parent threatened to take this further if Emily didn't reconsider a failing grade. She had brushed it off as part of the job, but detectives wondered whether such bitterness might have followed her beyond the classroom. When emotions run high, reason often falls away, and the possibility of retaliation lingers. Then came the discovery of the late-night calls. Phone records revealed that for nearly a month before her disappearance, Emily had received multiple calls from a blocked or unregistered number, often just after midnight. None of the calls had lasted long enough to establish a conversation, and no voicemail was ever left. Investigators traced the activity to a prepaid burner phone, the kind purchased with cash and discarded at will. It was a classic tactic used to mask identity, and while it couldn't prove stalking, it raised troubling questions. Friends admitted Emily once joked that someone was playing games with her phone at night, but the laughter carried an undertone of unease. Attention soon shifted to her personal life, specifically her recent breakup. Emily had dated a fellow teacher at Ridgeway High, a biology instructor several years older. Their relationship had been private but steady for over a year, only ending a few weeks before she disappeared. He admitted to investigators that the breakup had hurt him deeply, but he insisted he bore her no ill will. His alibi placed him at a family dinner the night of her disappearance, a claim supported by relatives, but detectives still scrutinized his behavior. They noted his visible agitation in interviews, his insistence on defending the relationship, and the lingering bitterness in his tone. Though evidence didn't tie him to her absence, suspicion never fully left his shadow. Meanwhile, rumors among students took the investigation down another unsettling path. Several classmates whispered that one troubled boy had developed an unhealthy fixation on Emily. Teachers had noticed his tendency to linger near her classroom long after the final bell. His essays often contained dark, ambiguous references to teachers and authority figures. Some peers claimed he spoke about her in ways that blurred admiration with obsession. Detectives questioned him, and though he appeared anxious, he denied any involvement. He admitted he respected her as a mentor, but insisted he never pursued her outside of school. His story couldn't be disproven, but the rumors only deepened the sense of unease surrounding the case. Every lead seemed plausible, yet each dissolved into uncertainty. A parent's anger could have turned dangerous. An ex-boyfriend might have held on to resentment. A student's fixation could have spiraled into action, and the anonymous late-night caller seemed to haunt all of them, an invisible figure on the periphery who might have been a prankster or something much worse. The investigation became a maze of overlapping theories, each pointing in a different direction but none offering solid ground. The town followed every rumor with morbid fascination. Some believed Emily had left willingly, overwhelmed by work and personal strain, and would resurface when she was ready. Others whispered about a crime of opportunity, a stranger who saw her alone and struck at just the right moment. Every theory seemed to reflect not only the town's fear, but also its need to make sense of the unthinkable. For investigators, the problem was that each version of events seemed just as likely as the next. Detectives brought in specialists from the State Bureau to review the case. Behavioral profilers noted that the late-night calls suggested escalating behavior, possibly by someone who knew Emily personally. If it was a stalker, they argued, the next step after phone harassment could easily be physical confrontation. But the absence of evidence was glaring. No forced entry into her car, no defensive wounds, no physical trail. If someone had abducted her, they had done so cleanly, in a manner that left behind nothing but questions. For Emily's family, the swirl of theories was unbearable. Her mother struggled against the idea that her daughter could have trusted the wrong person. Her father bristled at the suggestion she might have left voluntarily. Each rumor chipped away at their picture of Emily, reshaping her in ways that didn't feel true. Yet, in the silence of her absence, they had no way to fight back against speculation. Theories began to multiply faster than detectives could chase them. Anonymous tips suggested sightings in nearby towns. A caller claimed Emily had been seen at a gas station, though the footage revealed only another young woman with similar features. Another insisted she had boarded a bus, but the ticket record showed no such name. Each false lead drained time and resources, leaving investigators frustrated and the family more desperate than ever. By the end of the second month, the case file had grown thick, stuffed with interviews, phone records, and handwritten timelines. The board in the investigation room was crowded with names and photographs, each connected by strings of possibility. But nothing held. Every door detectives opened led to another hallway of speculation. Emily Carter's life, once so seemingly simple, had become a tangle of unanswered questions. And as the investigation edged deeper into uncertainty, a darker realization began to take hold, not just among detectives but across the community. If every theory could be true, then any one of them could also be false. And that meant the truth might be something they hadn't even considered yet, waiting in the shadows just beyond their reach. As the first winter after Emily Carter's disappearance settled over Ridgway, the sharp urgency of the investigation began to dull under the weight of silence. Weeks of exhaustive searches had yielded nothing. Interviews had dried up. Theories, once pursued with conviction, now dangled unresolved. For detectives, it became harder to push forward when every promising lead crumbled into dead ends. For her family, the hardest truth was dawning. Emily was gone, and no one knew where or why. The case file thickened with reports, yet it seemed to grow colder with each passing day. Detectives were reassigned as other crimes demanded attention, and new officers unfamiliar with the details inherited the case only to find themselves staring at the same walls of unanswered questions. The momentum that had once propelled the search slowed, replaced by routine check-ins and the occasional review of evidence. With no new clues, the silence around Emily became heavier, suffocating those closest to her. At Ridgway High, her classroom door remained closed. The administration, uncertain of how to move forward, kept her desk exactly as she had left it. Papers still sat in neat piles, a mug rested on the corner, and her handwriting lingered across the whiteboard until it was finally erased by time. Students passed by quietly, some glancing in as if expecting her to reappear, others avoiding the hallway altogether because the sight was too much to bear. Her absence became a daily reminder of a life interrupted, frozen in place while everyone else was forced to keep moving. For her family, the days blurred into one another. They organized vigils in the first months, their hope carried by candlelight and prayers whispered into the cold night. But as the years began to stretch, attendance dwindled. People moved on, even if they didn't mean to. The family clung to rituals, calling her phone just to hear her voicemail, setting a place for her at holidays, visiting the school to feel close to her. But each ritual carried more sorrow than comfort. Rumors still circulated from time to time, sparking short-lived bursts of hope. A truck driver claimed to have seen her at a rest stop several states away. A woman in a distant town swore she recognized Emily's picture and insisted she had spoken to her. Each claim sent detectives scrambling, and for a brief moment, her parents allowed themselves to imagine their daughter alive. But every sighting collapsed under scrutiny. Grainy security footage showed no resemblance. Witnesses admitted their memories were fuzzy. One supposed lead turned out to be a case of mistaken identity so blatant that investigators barely concealed their frustration. Each false alarm reopened wounds for the family, leaving them more weary than before. The community, too, adjusted in quiet ways. For months, Ridgway residents had locked their doors religiously, walked in pairs, and kept watch over their children with renewed vigilance. But as time went on, fear dulled into resignation. People no longer whispered about an abductor lurking in town. Instead, they spoke of Emily, as though she had simply evaporated, a sad but unsolved chapter in their history. The sharp edges of terror softened into a dull ache of unanswered loss. Detectives occasionally revisited old suspects, but nothing new surfaced. The ex-boyfriend had long since moved to another district, his name still shadowed by suspicion, but never supported by evidence. The troubled student graduated and drifted away from town, leaving behind only whispers of what might have been. The unknown caller remained the most haunting detail, but without records or a device, the trail was permanently cold. Investigators knew the truth was likely buried in one of these avenues, yet the inability to prove anything left the case stagnant. As the years passed, Emily's mother became the most visible reminder of the case. She attended town meetings, pressed detectives for updates, and spoke at events for missing persons advocacy. Her voice, once strong with determination, grew softer with time but never broke. Her father grew quieter, his grief carried in silence, visible only in the way he stared at old photographs. Her younger siblings learned to live under the shadow of a sister's absence, their milestones forever marked by what she wasn't there to see. By the 5-year mark, the investigation had become little more than periodic reviews, and the hope that new technology might someday unlock what had been missed. Cold case units considered re-examining evidence, but without a body, without a weapon, without even a confirmed crime scene, their options were limited. Detectives admitted off the record that cases like Emily's were the hardest. When someone simply vanished without explanation, the trail often never reignited. The sense of despair settled heavily over Ridgeway. The community wanted closure, but closure never came. Instead, Emily's name lingered like an unfinished sentence, mentioned in hushed tones whenever another tragedy struck the town. Her picture, once plastered across telephone poles and store windows, faded and peeled until only a few remained, yellowed by the sun and rain. What had once been a rallying cry became an echo, fading into the background of daily life. Yet for her family, the pain never dulled. They lived in the limbo of uncertainty, tortured by possibilities. Was she alive somewhere, unable to return? Had someone hidden her so well that even the most determined search could not reach her? Or had she died that very day, her final moments erased from the world without a trace? The lack of answers became its own kind of torment, more unbearable than the truth itself might have been. By the 7th year, Emily Carter's disappearance was no longer front-page news. It was filed among the unsolved, one more case in a system filled with too many. But within the silence, a question still lingered. If her trail had ended at the school parking lot, then where had she gone? That question haunted detectives, family, and community alike, waiting for something, anything, that might break the stillness. And soon, a violent storm would do just that, tearing open the ground to reveal secrets that had remained hidden in plain sight. 7 long years had passed since Emily Carter vanished from Ridgeway High. For her family, time had not healed the wound. It had only stretched it thinner, making each day feel more fragile than the last. For the town, her disappearance had faded into a ghost story, one of those unsolved tragedies mentioned in passing but rarely dwelled upon. Life had moved on in outward appearance, but the silence surrounding Emily never truly lifted. It lingered in the air like unfinished business. And then, in the summer of the 7th year, nature itself shifted the ground beneath them. That June, a violent storm system swept through Ridgeway and the surrounding counties. Sheets of rain fell for 2 days straight, swelling rivers, toppling trees, and overwhelming the drainage systems that crisscrossed the wooded land behind the high school. The storm left behind more than just debris and downed power lines. As the floodwaters receded, they revealed scars in the landscape, collapsed soil, broken culverts, and exposed ground where there had once been dense undergrowth. Locals venturing out to assess the damage stumbled across one of these scars in the woodland not far from the staff parking lot, the same area where Emily's trail had ended years before. At first glance, it looked like little more than a muddy sinkhole, a collapsed stretch of earth leading down to a drainage chamber long forgotten. But as the sun hit the waterlogged soil, something caught the eye of a passerby. Through the mud and tangle of roots, a metallic sheen glimmered faintly. It wasn't the shape of a pipe or storm grate. It looked like the curved edge of something man-made, something buried deep and hidden until the storm had ripped it open. Authorities were called, and within hours the wooded stretch was cordoned off with yellow tape. Police, who had seen countless false alarms over the years, approached with caution, but the sight of twisted metal lodged in the earth stopped them cold. For some, it was the color of weathered steel. For others, it was the faint suggestion of paint barely clinging to a surface. Whatever it wasn't natural, and it wasn't supposed to be there. News of the discovery spread quickly. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the tape, whispering about what had been found. Theories erupted instantly. An abandoned vehicle, a piece of machinery, maybe even evidence tied to Ridgway's most haunting mystery. To the townspeople, there was no escaping the connection. The location, the timing, the metallic glint in the soil, all of it seemed to point back to Emily. Detectives, many of whom had long since rotated away from the original investigation, returned to the site with heavy hearts. Some had been young officers when Emily vanished, still fresh in their careers, and the case had haunted them. Now, staring down at the collapsed drainage chamber, they felt the weight of possibility pressing hard against their chests. Could this finally be the break that had eluded them for 7 years? Specialized crews were called in to stabilize the ground and carefully excavate the area. The soil was loose, still soaked from the storm, and every movement risked collapsing the cavity further. Workers dug slowly, peeling back layers of earth and debris, while investigators stood by in grim silence. Inch by inch, more of the object emerged. It was metal, no question now, with jagged edges that hinted at something far larger beneath the mud. Then came the first clear sign. A wheel well, bent and half-crushed, unmistakable in its form. What lay beneath the drainage system wasn't discarded machinery. It was a vehicle. The atmosphere around the site shifted instantly. Officers scrambled to secure the perimeter, radios crackling with updates. Forensic teams were rushed in. The crowd of locals pressed closer, straining to see. Everyone understood the gravity of what had just been uncovered. A vehicle buried beneath the ground behind Ridgway High could mean only one thing: a connection to the town's most enduring disappearance. The excavation continued late into the night, floodlights casting harsh beams across the churned mud. As more of the structure was revealed, the outline of a small sedan became clear. Its body was rusted and collapsed in places, the color obscured by years of soil and water damage, but enough remained to recognize it for what it was. A car hidden where no car should ever have been. And almost immediately, one detail hit every detective present like a blow. The make and model looked eerily similar to Emily Carter's missing Toyota Corolla. For a town that had lived in uncertainty for nearly a decade, the sight was both electrifying and horrifying. On one hand, the possibility of finally finding answers felt closer than ever. On the other hand, the implications were devastating. If this was Emily's car, it meant her fate had been sealed not long after she left the classroom that afternoon. It meant she hadn't vanished into thin air. She had been here all along, just beyond reach, hidden beneath the ground where no one thought to look. Investigators halted the excavation before fully opening the car. They knew what might be waiting inside, and they needed to proceed with care. Forensic experts would handle the final steps, ensuring that any evidence, no matter how degraded by time, would be preserved. But even as they closed the site for the night, every officer, every bystander, and every member of Emily's family who received the call understood what was coming. The silence of 7 years was about to be broken. The storm that had torn through Ridgway had ripped open more than trees and soil. It had torn open a case the town thought might never move again. And as the outlines of that buried vehicle solidified under the floodlights, the old fears came rushing back. People held their breath, waiting for confirmation, knowing that what lay inside could finally answer the question that had haunted them for so long, or leave them with a truth even darker than they had imagined. The morning after the storm's discovery, Ridgway awoke to the sound of heavy machinery moving into the woods behind the high school. Floodlights and police tape marked off the excavation site, transforming a quiet patch of woodland into the center of the town's attention. Forensic experts, engineers, and crime scene investigators worked shoulder to shoulder, each step deliberate as they prepared to pull from the earth what nature had revealed. The metallic outline of a buried vehicle, long hidden beneath layers of soil and debris, was about to be exposed in full view. Crews began by stabilizing the collapsed drainage chamber, reinforcing its edges to prevent another cave-in. Mud sucked at boots and machinery alike, making every movement slow and cautious. Bit by bit, the twisted frame of a car emerged from the muck, its shape unmistakable even under years of corrosion. Rust had eaten through the panels, vines had wrapped themselves around the undercarriage, and the roof had partially caved from the weight of earth pressing down for nearly a decade. Yet despite the damage, the silhouette of a sedan was clear. Detectives stood in silence as the first license plate was revealed. Worn, discolored, but still legible under the dirt, the numbers told a story that no one wanted to believe. They matched the plate registered to Emily Carter's Toyota Corolla, the very car that investigators had believed they found in the staff parking lot on the night she went missing. Shock rippled through the team. If her real car had been buried here all this time, then what had they been looking at back then? The car was lifted slowly from the ground, winched up inch by inch until it rested on solid earth. Its windows were clouded with grime, its paint long gone, but the outline was undeniable. It was Emily's vehicle. Detectives checked the VIN number stamped into the frame, and the confirmation was absolute. The revelation sent chills through the investigation. The case that had haunted Ridgeway for years had just taken a darker and more complicated turn. Word spread quickly across town, and by the afternoon, crowds had gathered at the perimeter, straining for glimpses of the wreck. For years, people had debated whether Emily had left by choice, been taken by someone she trusted, or fallen victim to a crime of opportunity. Now those theories were shaken to their core. If her car had been hidden here, within sight of the school, then someone had staged the discovery of another vehicle to throw investigators off course. The implication was chilling. This had not been the work of chance. It had been deliberate. Detectives revisited their own memories of the early days of the search. They remembered standing in the staff lot, staring at a Toyota Corolla parked neatly between two faded lines. They remembered her purse on the seat, her phone wedged by the console, her keys lying openly in the cup holder. At the time, it had seemed unshakable proof that she disappeared after leaving the car behind. Now, those same details looked staged, almost theatrical. Someone had wanted them to find that vehicle, wanted them to believe Emily had walked away on her own. And for 7 years, that deception had held. The realization ignited anger among investigators. How had they been so thoroughly misled? Who had access not only to Emily, but also to a nearly identical car, enough to pass as hers? The fact that her real vehicle had been hidden less than half a mile from the school raised haunting questions about how close they had always been to the truth. The community, already rattled by years of uncertainty, felt betrayed when the news broke. Parents and teachers who had lived in fear for their safety now confronted the possibility that the entire case had been manipulated from the beginning. Candlelight vigils, reward posters, endless nights of searching, all of it had been built on a lie. People whispered about cover-ups, about someone within the school or even within law enforcement steering the investigation away from where it should have gone. For Emily's family, the discovery brought no relief, only devastation. They had begged for 7 years to know what happened to her, clinging to the faint hope she might be alive. Now, the sight of her car rising from the ground forced them to confront the reality that she had never left Ridgeway at all. The false car in the parking lot had stolen from them the chance of finding her sooner, and the knowledge cut deep. Inside the unearthed vehicle, forensic experts prepared to search for evidence. The doors were pried open carefully, each movement filmed and documented. The interior was waterlogged, packed with mud and leaves, its seats collapsed from years of rot. Still, investigators sifted through the wreckage, hoping time had not erased everything. What they found would become the turning point of the case, but in that first moment, standing over the rusted shell, all that anyone could feel was the weight of deception. The storm had not only uncovered a car, it had exposed the fact that someone had orchestrated one of the most elaborate misdirections this small town had ever seen. Emily's disappearance had never been the unsolvable mystery it appeared to be. The truth had been hidden, buried just out of sight, protected by layers of mud and a carefully planted lie. And now, with the car out in the open, investigators knew that whatever answers they sought next would be locked inside it. The excavation site fell into a tense silence as the car was sealed off for forensic examination. Detectives knew that within its corroded frame lay the fragments of a truth long denied, fragments that could finally point to who had deceived an entire community. But the discovery also reopened wounds and fears, for if someone had staged a car to mislead police, then that someone had been watching closely all along. The unearthed car was hauled under tarps to a secure forensic facility, its corroded shell treated not just as a vehicle, but as a tomb. For 7 years, investigators had worked without a crime scene, without a single piece of hard physical evidence to anchor their theories. Now, every inch of this ruined car held the possibility of answers. The work began slowly, carefully, as technicians in protective suits dismantled what remained of the interior, recording each fragment with painstaking detail. At first glance, the inside appeared gutted by time and water damage. Seats collapsed, springs rusted, and the roof sagged inward. Yet, as investigators sifted through the debris, small personal items began to surface. From the rear floorboard caked in mud, they retrieved a laminated school ID card, its photo blurred but still recognizable as Emily Carter's face. Nearby, lodged between the seat cushions, lay a pair of broken eyeglasses, the frame bent and lenses cracked as if they had been shattered by force. In the trunk, half buried in silt, were notebooks swollen with water damage, pages fused together but still faintly marked by Emily's handwriting. These items, fragile and worn, were more than objects. They were proof she had been inside this car, proof she had not simply walked away from her life. For investigators, the discovery reignited urgency. The staged car and the staff lot had misled them for years, but now they were holding undeniable evidence that Emily's real vehicle had been hidden just beyond reach. The implications were devastating, but also galvanizing. For the first time since her disappearance, they could follow a tangible trail. Forensic specialists began searching for biological evidence. Swabs were taken from the interior surfaces, soil samples collected, and every scrap of fabric preserved. It was unlikely the DNA would survive intact after 7 years exposed to water and rot, but investigators hoped that even the smallest trace might reveal a clue. Then came the breakthrough no one had expected. On the passenger side doorframe, beneath layers of grime, analysts discovered a partial fingerprint preserved in an area less exposed to the elements. Carefully lifted, the print was run through databases. Hours later, the results came back with a match, not to Emily, not to anyone in her circle of family or friends, but to a man whose name had surfaced briefly in the early investigation before being quietly set aside. His name was Daniel Holt, a maintenance worker employed at Ridgeway High at the time of Emily's disappearance. Holt had been interviewed in the first days of the case. At the time, he was one of many staff members questioned about what they had seen that afternoon. His answers had seemed unremarkable. He claimed he left campus shortly after the final bell, said he saw nothing unusual in the lot, and was dismissed with little follow-up. Months later, he was fired from the school for reasons listed as personnel issues, details that never drew attention amid the swirl of theories focused elsewhere. To detectives then, Holt had been background noise, one of dozens of names that never crystallized into a lead. Now, with his fingerprint preserved inside Emily's hidden car, he became the center of the storm. The revelation electrified the cold case team. After years of dead ends, they finally had a name tied to hard evidence. Detectives began combing through Holt's history. They discovered that after leaving the school, he moved quietly between jobs in neighboring counties, never staying long in one place. Records showed he had been questioned in minor disputes, but never charged with anything serious. Still, his pattern of instability now looked far more sinister when framed against Emily's disappearance. The community, upon hearing the development, reacted with shock and disbelief. Few remembered Holt well. Those who did recalled him as a quiet, almost invisible figure who fixed leaky pipes and replaced light bulbs. To think that someone so unremarkable could have slipped beneath suspicion for so long was chilling. Parents questioned how the school could have missed warning signs. Former colleagues replayed their memories, wondering if they had overlooked something obvious. Emily's family, though devastated, clung to the discovery as the first real step toward justice. For years they had lived with silence, with speculation that tarnished her memory and left them stranded in grief. Now there was finally something concrete, a name to connect to the suffering they had endured. Her mother wept when detectives told her about the fingerprint, her grief tempered by determination. She wanted answers, even if they shattered the fragile hope she had clung to. Detectives knew the evidence was only the beginning. They would need more than a fingerprint to build a case. Still, the discovery set off a chain reaction. Warrants were filed, Holt's previous residences investigated, his former co-workers re-interviewed. Every scrap of his life was turned over in search of connections. And as the pieces began to surface, a picture emerged of a man who had been closer to Emily's final moments than anyone had realized. The car had not only yielded Emily's belongings, it had revealed the fingerprint of the man who likely put them there. And with that single print, the case shifted from hopeless to alive, roaring back after 7 years of silence. Detectives no longer wondered if Emily's disappearance could be solved. They began to ask a different, far more pressing question. If Daniel Holt had hidden her car so carefully, what else had he managed to bury where no one thought to look? As detectives dug deeper into Daniel Holt's past, the fragments of evidence began to form a chilling picture of what had happened that afternoon. Records showed that Holt had access to nearly every corner of Ridgeway High. He knew the drainage systems behind the school, the locked service doors, and the blind spots where cameras didn't reach. He had keys to areas students and teachers never thought about, the unseen passages of the building. That knowledge became the backdrop for the timeline investigators painstakingly reconstructed. Emily had been seen leaving her classroom around 4:10 p.m., heading toward the lot. Detectives now believe Holt intercepted her near a maintenance access door just beyond the hallway. Perhaps he asked for help, perhaps he claimed there was an issue she needed to look at, or perhaps he simply blocked her path. However it began, it ended with Holt overpowering her and forcing her toward her car. Forensic work on the unearthed vehicle showed signs that the passenger side had been forced shut, the metal bent in a way consistent with someone being shoved inside. Once Emily was in the car, Holt likely drove it himself, steering not toward the roads but toward the drainage system he knew so well. The storm-exposed chamber where her car was discovered matched precisely with maintenance maps Holt had worked on during his employment. Detectives realized he had chosen the location deliberately, a place he knew could swallow a vehicle whole, hiding it beneath earth and overgrowth where no one would ever stumble across it. The deception did not end there. Holt had stolen Emily's keys from her belongings earlier, along with duplicate items from her classroom or personal effects, planting them in the look-alike Corolla left in the lot. By staging that car with her phone, purse, and wallet, he created the illusion that Emily had walked away from her vehicle on her own. For years, that illusion shaped every theory, every search, every false lead. While police scoured highways and forests, her true car, and likely her final moments, were buried less than half a mile away. The truth, once assembled, was terrifying not because of its complexity, but because of its simplicity. A man with access, knowledge, and opportunity had manipulated an entire town into looking in the wrong direction, while the answers sat just beyond their reach, waiting to be revealed. Detectives tracked Daniel Holt across state lines, piecing together the life he had built in the shadows of another identity. He had changed jobs frequently, moved from town to town, and lived quietly enough to avoid notice. But once his fingerprint tied him to Emily's hidden car, his freedom unraveled. With warrants in hand, authorities moved in. Holt was arrested outside a modest rental home, his face blank, giving no sign of the secrets he had carried for 7 years. Back in Ridgeway, forensic teams completed their grim task. Deep inside the unearthed vehicle, beneath debris and time's decay, skeletal remains were recovered. Dental records confirmed what the family had dreaded, yet long suspected. It was Emily Carter. Her broken glasses, her notebooks, her school ID, all lay with her, silent testimony to the life that had been cut short. The confirmation shattered what little hope her family still held. After years of living in limbo, they finally had an answer. But it was an answer that ended every possibility of her coming home. The community, once bound by speculation and rumor, fell into a stunned quiet. Parents who had told their children to stay vigilant realized the danger had not come from strangers, but from someone who had walked the same halls, fixed the same classrooms, and blended into the fabric of their lives. Teachers who had once spoken casually with Holt now struggled with the knowledge that he had engineered one of the most elaborate deceptions their town had ever seen. Emily's family faced the impossible task of grieving anew. They had lived 7 years in the tension between hope and despair, clinging to the chance she might still be alive. Now, closure came with a cruel edge. It left no room for hope, only the weight of finality. Her classroom desk, preserved like a shrine, no longer represented possibility. It became a memorial to a future erased. And for Ridgway, the most haunting detail was not the arrest, nor the confession implied by Holt's silence. It was the geography of the crime. Emily's real car and Emily herself had been entombed within sight of the school, hidden beneath earth that generations of students walked over daily. The truth was never far. It was always there, buried in plain sight.